Okay, it's 6 o'clock, so I'll go ahead and get us started. What I will say is we kind of mirrored what we did in the past. We have a little QR code there for you to scan and kind of input your questions as we go along, and when we get to the end, we'll kind of go through those questions and answer them together, so, or as we go. What I will say is right here is our website. At the top of our website, we have a link or a tab at the top that has all our bond information on there. It's Bond 2024. It's on the right, usually on the right when you come open up our web page, you'll see that information. And a lot of information that we go or talk about tonight will be included on that tab. So how did we get here? Well, as the bond failed in November, and so we brought the Future Planning Committee back together to discuss, just the different ideas and discuss different campus needs, different departmental needs, and really listen to what the community has been asking. Some of the consensus from that meeting is the community wanted a bond proposal that had different propositions where they could vote on different projects. And so the Future Planning Committee developed that proposal and brought that recommendation to the Board of Trustees. The Board of Trustees called for a bond for a May 4th election, and that was called on February 16th, 2024, in the total amount of $106.2 million. So, Joshua ISD, as we all know, if you drive around town, you can't miss all the subdivisions that are being built. This numbers right here shows Joshua ISD to grow 1,500 students in the next 10 years. That's based on a conservative 2% growth rate over those next several years. What I will say is in the next 5 to 10 years, we're projected to have 5,400 homes. If you take the average yield of, say, 0.4, you're looking at over 2,000 students within Joshua ISD. So conservative 2% growth rate shows us having about 1,500 students in the next 10 years. So if you take another look at enrollment projections here, you look at the different campus capacities. Right now, you'll see Elder Elementary and North Joshua that are currently over their student capacity numbers for their campus. And then Caddo Grove has fluctuated all year. They've been within 5 students of their capacity, and I think when this graph was created, they were currently about 20 students below their capacity. And we're constantly getting more and more students each and every day. What I will say, and before I kind of jump into the next slide, and you'll kind of see all the growth that's taken place within our Joshua ISD boundary lines. Some have asked, why don't we redistrict our attendance zones for our elementary campuses? And you'll see that in the next slide. And so simply looking at this, and I'll come back to this, but looking at that would be a short-term solution. It would give us maybe 1 to 2 years, not a long-term fix going forward. And you can see as these numbers continue to grow pretty vastly across the board for the next 10 years. And that leads me to the next slide. The one right here in the middle that you'll see right there within the North Joshua attendance zone, that is that Chisholm Summit Master Plan Community. The Chisholm Summit Master Plan Community is looking at roughly around 3,000 homes that will be within the Joshua attendance boundary lines. What I will say is I've talked to the developer, and they are projecting their first home in the last quarter of 24 of this year, excuse me, not school year, of this year, the last quarter, they're projected to have their first home in the ground. Over to the left of that, you'll see in the Caddo Grove attendance zone, you'll see another master plan community. That's off 915. The projection is another 1,000 homes within Joshua ISD. That subdivision is split. 3/4 is Joshua ISD, 1/4 is Godly ISD. Right down south right here in the Plum Creek attendance zone, you've got what is known as the Alps, what is known as Burgess Meadows, and what is known as Custard Farms. Not sure why the developer decided to go with all 3 of those, but that's the plan that was presented. The Alps, and I'll come back to this, the Alps is right here. the Alps is a multifamily apartment complex, multifamily units. There's 264 of those multifamily units in the Alps. And this is right off 174, heading down to Cleburne, off to the left, just past McCoy's. You can't miss it. You'll see, the first thing you'll see is those apartment complexes being built. Just behind there, you've got what is known as Burgess Meadows. That's where they've got some homes within that area right there. In total, there's 201 single-family lots within just Burgess Meadows. Over to the right of that, you've got Custard Farms. Custard Farms is another 282 single-family lots, in addition to the 201 that Burgess Meadows has in it. And so, in total, you're looking at over 400 total lots, single-family home lots that will impact Joshua ISD boundary lines. Kind of coming back here to this map right here. And you won't see it because it's actually actually indicated behind these stars. But you have the Live Oak apartment complex that is right across the street, basically from Cleburne Ford, that feeds into Staples Elementary attendance zone. That right now, just got word that they are already started to lease their first, building set, and they're looking to move into the second building set. That apartment complex alone is another 300 to 400 multifamily units that will feed into the Staples attendance zone. Not to mention, right behind the word Staples, you got the yellow right there. That's Mockingbird. The green up top. The green right here is Mockingbird Hills. Mockingbird Hills has progressed very, very quickly. Back here in Elder, right behind the star, that's the high school. So back behind there, you've got Cooper Valley's addition. Cooper Valley addition, just from the very first home football game we had. There was one home within that phase, and to now they are almost completing that phase. Homes are going up left and right within the Cooper Valley addition there. And then right down here, this is the parks at Panchart Farms. You can see in this early video, you got phase 1 right here. Phase 2, which in October of 23, you'll see a lot of homes that have progressed in there. They are projecting to be and have their first home later this quarter in phase 3, as they've started to really hone in on the infrastructure of phase 3. Phase 3 alone is another 430 single-family lots that will feed into the North Joshua attendance zone. In total, this entire master plan community is just over 800 total family lots, or total single-family lots, just within this area right here, which all would feed to the North Joshua attendance zone. So that brings us to the proposition that was proposed from the Future Planning Committee. The Future Planning Committee proposed 4 propositions. Proposition A at $63.1 million calls for a new elementary school. And the addition to Nichols Middle School, it would be 10 extra classrooms and a science lab, which would take Nichols Middle School's school capacity up to 1,000 students, and that so that they would mirror and mimic what Laughlin is as far as student capacity, and we'd have the room for growth for many, many years down the road. Proposition B is the entire renovation and expansion of the current kitchen and cafeteria at Joshua High School. The cafeteria was built in 1983. The second half of that was built in the 90s. So you've got 2-tiered level system there, which doesn't allow us to expand our capacities, student capacities within the cafeteria. Right now we're capped at about 400 per lunch period, even though the high school has about 1,300 students within their campus. And so we're with 400 students in a cafeteria, we have 3 lunch periods, so that means several lunch periods have more than that total capacity within that cafeteria space. In addition to that, when you talk about the kitchen area, because of the electrical components, the wiring, the electrical box cannot sustain any additional load capacity, so we are restricted on any type of new equipment that we can add, and the space is condensed for some of that newer equipment. And so a lot of the flooring is starting to basically deteriorate. A lot of trip hazards are happening with the floor from the breakup and just being through all the traffic over the years within that certain area. And then we've got several different issues as far as equipment that are past their useful lifespan and are needing to be replaced. Then on Proposition C, that is our career and technical education renovation and expansion. Just like the cafeteria, this would be a complete overhaul of the entire area. The current space is 26,000 square feet. It currently has health science, cosmetology, culinary arts, construction, all within that area. And right now, simply because of the size, we don't have additional space needed to add students within those programs. Construction, culinary arts, and cosmetology are basically have a waiting list, or a lottery system is used now with our eighth grade students. When they go to pick those classes, they're put in a lottery system, so because we don't have the space needed to be able to accommodate the additional growth within those programs. And so that current space, we would renovate that entire area. One thing I will say about the health science portion of that building is they have one classroom connected to another classroom. Well, you go down the hall in the first classroom, you're constantly disrupting instruction within that classroom to get to the next classroom, because the main health science classroom is double blocked, which means they have back-to-back periods. And so when the period rings to change for the period before that, then students are constantly going through the main portion of that classroom. That teacher then has to stop instruction and allow those kids to get out of the classroom and allow the other kids to come through to get to the next teacher's classroom. Plus, in addition to that, we would add another 31,000 square feet, which would create more classroom space that would allow us to free up our career and technical education programs that are inside the main part of the building and centralize them all in one wing, our CTE wing, and then allow us to add additional capacity through classroom space through these programs, allow us to add future programs into our career and technical education academics piece going forward. I will say right now with construction, we don't have construction class. We have the shop, but we don't have a classroom that's set next to that. The students have to start from a classroom inside the main part of the building and either go outside, which ends up being a safety concern, or cutting all the way through the building to get to the shop, which reduces their time in the shop and reduces their time in that class period. In addition to Proposition C, you got Proposition D, which is at $4.7 million. You got HVAC replacements, paving improvements at Caddo and Laughlin campuses, and then safety and security updates, security cameras, PA systems, and fire alarms. Go back to HVAC. In all of our buildings, we have over 800 rooftop units. Right now, we have about 360 of those units that are reaching its useful span, or its lifespan of those units. And so what we're having, problems that we're having to deal with, is we're currently having to contact the manufacturer to recreate parts for the HVAC. That then delays the process of getting those units back up to running and making that comfortable for those students and for those staff members in those particular classrooms or within the building. Another problem that we're having with HVAC is the cost per rooftop unit. Each rooftop unit averages about $20,000. With that said, with 360 units, to get all of our units replaced, we're looking at anywhere between $6 to $7 million to bring those up to par. We do have 2 campuses that are critical needs as far as needing total replacements. Those are Staples Elementary right behind us, and then Plum Creek Elementary as well. And so those are some big projects that we need to look at and try to take advantage of replacing those HVAC units within Proposition D. With that being said, here's a slide that shows this current project, or this current proposal, at $106.2 million. Obviously, we all are aware of inflation costs that are constantly hitting our society. And so this current project, or this current proposal, would cost us $106.2 million here in May of '24. In November of 25, that cost would be $126.5 million. And now I'll turn it over to Ms. Rebecca. She'll review some school funding.
Okay, so of course, anytime we're planning for a bond or the board calls for a bond, there's a financial impact that we also have to talk about related to that. And so I like to start that conversation with a high-level overview of school funding in general, because that definitely helps to understand that financial impact on that bond. So the school operates out of two main funds. We have maintenance and operation and interest and sinking. The maintenance and operation fund is what pays for the day-to-day operations of the district. So by far the majority of that fund goes to salaries and benefits for staff. That takes up about 82% of that total maintenance and operations budget. And then the rest of that 18% that's left gets taken up very quickly by things like utilities and our transportation contract, supplies and materials for students, professional development for teachers, everything else, all the supplies to maintain the buildings that our operations department needs, everything else that goes into keeping the schools running and operating is what is paid for out of maintenance and operations. And then interest and sinking, that fund pays principal and interest payments on our debt. So when we issue a bond as a school district, it's you can think of it like us as homeowners. When we go to purchase a home, we find that home and we take out a mortgage and we pay principal and interest payments every month for a long-term period, usually 30 years. And it's similar for the district when we're going to issue a bond. We issue the bond and we get that money. We use that money to complete those projects, and then we go on to make principal and interest payments over a long-term period of time, usually about 25 or 30 years. The interest and sinking fund makes those debt payments. That fund cannot pay for anything else. It cannot pay for the projects themselves. It cannot pay for salaries for teachers or any staff. It can't pay for any maintenance and operations expenses. So we cannot move money back and forth. That interest and sinking fund solely pays principal and interest on debt. So if all four bond propositions are to pass, this would have an impact on our interest and sinking tax rate of about 17 cents, just a little more than that. It would bring it to 50 cents, which is the maximum rate. For the average home in Joshua, the average home is a little over $286,000. That information is from our Central Appraisal District. That they send us our values every year so we can work on our tax rates and things like that, and our budget for our tax revenue, and so that information comes directly from the appraisal district. Our average home is about $286,000, and the tax impact that 17-cent rate increase would have an annual tax impact of about $308 for the year. That works out to be about $25.67 per month. And of course, any different home value would have a different impact, but that is the average value. So this chart here breaks out that impact by proposition. So we can see here proposition A, and so since there's four propositions, they'll all get voted on separately. And so any combination could pass or fail. We could have one pass and three fail, or any combination could occur after the voting. And so they would each have their own tax impact, of course. So proposition A by itself would have about a 10-cent tax rate impact, and that monthly impact, again, on that average home value would be a little over $15 a month. Proposition B all by itself has a tax rate impact of a little over a penny and a monthly impact on that tax bill of a little over $2 a month. Proposition C all by itself is about 5 cents, a little less than 5 cents on the tax rate, and a monthly impact of about $7 a month. And Proposition D all by itself is less than a penny on the tax rate and about $1 a month on that average home value. And so again, we don't have, this is based on us estimating what will happen with our property values and everything like that. We don't get that information for the next budget year until closer to the end of summer. The end of July is when we get our certified values. from the appraisal district. And so those of course have an impact on what that tax rate will be. And then, as I said before, depends what passes, if anything passes, as to what tax impact that would have. But something I like to point out, like Proposition D, if that were to pass all by itself, we wouldn't amortize that over 30 years because those are things that don't last 30 years, so we wouldn't want to pay for 30 years on HVACs and fire alarms and security cameras. So we would probably only amortize that over 10 years at most. And so that tax rate impact might look a little different if that were the only one to pass. But that's just an example of something that could change from what we had estimated for these calculations. Again, that one is so small that probably wouldn't have there probably wouldn't be a big change in that. And so this chart here shows our tax rate history over the past several years in Joshua ISD, and it has consistently been going down every year. The last time we passed a bond in Joshua was 2015. That was the bond that built Nichols Middle School and our ag project facility and did some other projects around the district. So the year after that, our tax rate, total tax rate, both M&O and INS together, was $1.61. And since that time, it has decreased over 52 cents, and we're down to a little less than $1.09 on that tax rate, our total tax rate. The M&O tax rate, since House Bill 3 passed in 2019, we've been required to compress that tax rate every year, depending on our property growth. So it depends both on statewide property growth. There's a statewide number that comes from the comptroller that every district has to compress by that amount. And then every district has to look at their own property growth, and if it's higher than that average, then you have to compress even more. So Joshua is usually in that situation where our property growth has been higher than the statewide average. And so we've had to compress our maintenance and operation tax rate more than just the average tax compression that other districts have had to do based on that average statewide growth. And so I like to stop on this slide and explain a little more in depth on school funding, because there's a lot of questions that we hear or things that we see that are just misconceptions about school funding and how that works. And so, for example, we have gotten questions from staff. Well, you decreased the tax rate over 18 cents and then you couldn't give a raise to staff, and we have this big budget deficit, and so why did you decrease the tax rate so much? Well, that was required. We had over the summer several special sessions of our legislature, and they were trying to provide property tax relief to taxpayers, and so they did that finally. And they increased the homestead exemption from $40,000 to $100,000, and they had required additional compression on all school district maintenance and operation tax rates. And so the maintenance and operation tax rate is pretty much a formula set in law. So we have to set our tax rate pretty much at what that formula comes out to. So we calculate it when we get our property values, we use that formula and we calculate our tax rate, and then the county also looks at our values and calculates that tax rate. And then ultimately the state comes out and says, this is your tax rate and this is what you're going to adopt. And so that there's not a whole lot of discretion left there on the M&O side for school districts. It's a formula set out. We were required to make that compression on that tax rate. But another thing that goes along with that in our tax revenue is our state funding is also a formula that's written in law, and our overall funding. So if you visualize sort of like a bucket, and that's our revenue that we're gonna have for the year. That size of that bucket is dependent upon student enrollment, student attendance, our student demographics. It's dependent on our programs that we offer, and a bunch of things go into that formula, but the state calculates that's your revenue. And so the first thing that goes into that bucket is our property taxes. So our property taxes start filling up that bucket for our revenue. And then if it doesn't get all the way full from our property taxes, the state fills it in. So a question we see in the community is, even though the tax rate's gone down, my value has gone up and my taxes go up every year. So why don't you have money to do these projects without increasing the tax rate? Well, because on the M&O side, that bucket is a fixed amount depending on all those things I just mentioned. And when our property taxes increase, the state just pays less because they have less to fill in. If the property taxes go down, which they did this year with that property tax relief, then the state has to fill in more. And so when the values go up, that money really goes back to the state because the values go up, so our taxes went up, and then the state didn't pay us as much because our bucket is fixed. We don't get that extra revenue from those extra, that the property values going up. That doesn't equal extra revenue for school districts. And so then on the INS side, that's mainly on the maintenance and operations side. On the INS side, it's a little different. There is some discretion in that tax rate. And when we passed the bond in 2015, that tax rate was 47 cents. You can see here it's gone down to about 33 cents, and that is because of property tax growth in our district. But since we've been discussing a bond election over the past several years, another concern we've heard in the community is, well, you're still paying on the last bond. Why should we give you another bond when you're still paying on that one? Well, the last bond, as I mentioned, was 2015, and it's a 30-year bond, so we are still paying on it. We will still be paying on it probably until 2045. But we hear that concern that maybe we're paying off our debt a little bit too slow. So that tax rate has been held steady, and we've started to recognize the surplus in that fund and build up fund balance, and we have some bonds that we can pay early, I think coming up in 2026. And so that fund balance, as I said, the INS fund, it can only be used to pay principal and interest payments on debt. It can't be used for anything else. So as those bonds come due, or they come up for available for early payment, we'll have some fund balance there to start to pay off some of those principal balances early. And then hopefully that will help with some of those concerns that we're hearing from the community that maybe our debt payoff is too slow and we can start to get that paid down. This chart here is the tax rate comparison for our county. So this just shows all the school districts in Johnson County and each of their tax rates. And so because we have had that decrease in our tax rate every year, as I said, since 2016, we are at that third lowest spot. We've pretty consistently been there for the past several years. And then another thing we want to address is for our homeowners who are 65 years and older, as long as they have that exemption on their property, the 65 and over exemption, their taxes are frozen at that dollar amount when they got that exemption. They did get property tax relief over the summer as well with that property tax relief package that the legislature gave. So if their taxes were recalculated at those lower tax rates and with that higher exemption, and their freeze amount went down. So, but their taxes are frozen at that dollar amount that they're frozen at, and that 17-cent tax rate increase does not impact our senior homeowners as long as they have that exemption on there. And we just like to also point out that the ballot language does state this is a property tax increase. As I explained before, there would be, if all four propositions pass, or I explained all of the propositions individually, what that tax rate impact would be. And so this time, since we have the four propositions, we're going to have those four propositions on the ballot, 4 big long paragraphs about what you're voting for. And at the end of each one of them, it says, this is a property tax increase. And that legislation came out also in 2019. That is required to be on the ballot. And that is because the legislature wants voters to know that when you issue bonds, it does take more tax revenue because there's now more principal and interest payments for that district to make. So it does require more tax revenue to make those payments. So that is property tax increase. So that is the intention behind that law and the reason for that requirement on the ballot It is a property tax increase, but that can be confusing to a homeowner who's 65 years and older, who's been told, their taxes are frozen and they're not going to change, but then they get to that ballot and read this is a property tax increase. Well, that might be confusing, but their taxes are frozen. They wouldn't be impacted, and that is the reason for that, that language on the ballot.
Okay, to kind of wrap up here, all early voting will take place here at the administration building, right here in this room. Early voting starts Monday, obviously, April 22nd, goes through April 30th. Different this year is we have a Saturday and Sunday early voting times. Saturday is 8 to 4 here at the administration building, and Sunday 1 to 5. In addition to that, normally early voting's been 8 to 4, predominantly for the for our voters, but it's going to be from 7:30 to 7 at night during the week for early voting. And then obviously Election Day will take place over at our community room next to the high school there, next to the library, and that's on Saturday, May 4th from 7 to 7 at night. And so all that information on voting times and location can be found on our website as well. The next process I do want to point out that we haven't started any design process. Obviously, we wouldn't start any design process until or if the bond were to pass. And so that design process would last probably 6 to 8 months, working with the architect to design a school for our community. What I will point out is it's previous to, and kind of point back to the previous bond of 2015 in Nichols Middle School. During that process, we had our competitive sealed bid proposal. We received 7 bids. They then broke it down to 3 and interviewed 3 contractors before finally picking a contractor for that process. It would be our duty to make sure that we are holding those contractors to that industry rate for square footage for schools and warehouses. And so that's our obligation and duty to this community, is to make sure we hold them accountable to those rates. Just another picture here to look at. This is our expanding our career and technical education programs, being able to provide students space they need to be successful, and being able to allow more and more students to be within those programs. You've got health science down here at the classroom setting, engineering, being able to give them an engineering lab to work with their students there, and then down here with construction technology as well. And cosmetology on the next phase. Because those programs have reached their capacity, can't take on any more students, have a waiting list, providing the space that we can continue to build those programs, continue to expand those programs, and continue to impact more and more students' lives. And then last but not least, we got the high school cafeteria, being able to open that space up, increasing the overall capacity in those lunchrooms from 650 to 700 students per lunch period, making it a wide open space for those students, and kitchen area for our child nutrition staff. We have more information on our props. We've had some Facebook Lives where we've kind of dug a little bit deeper into each proposition, and we'll have one more proposition, or one more Facebook Live that's tomorrow at 5 o'clock, April 18th. That goes over specifically Proposition D and another overview of school funding and school finance. And so all those are listed on our website under the bond tab, and you can find that information and watch those videos as well.